Singapore, capital town of a tiny island at the foot of the Malayan Peninsula. A town which, since its foundation by Sir Stamford Raffles in 1820, has become a thriving center of commerce and trade. A town in which Malays, Chinese, Indians, Eurasians, and Europeans all live and work together for the benefit of the whole community, and yet retain their individuality. The business heart of this cosmopolitan town is Raffles Place. Here it is that many of the romantic Far East trading houses have their main offices. Amongst these, Guthrie's, East India merchants and agents for interests as varied as typewriters and tin, rubber and palm oil, shop windows and ships. But on this day, the offices were silent, for it was Sunday, and concern had switched from stock market prices to the making of a good curry lunch. Out on the roads, a ship had laid at anchor since dawn. But now, early on January the 8th, it was nosing its way towards its berth in Singapore docks. This ship, the Chusan, had amongst its passengers Sir John Hay, making his 14th visit since 1925 to see and discuss the many Guthrie interests in Malaya. The quayside scene was a familiar one. The ship's rail lined with people, some seeing for the first time a strange, exciting place, and others renewing old acquaintances. And on the shore, the upturned, searching eyes, looking for a familiar face. Amongst those waiting this Sunday morning was Mr. A.F. Taylor, chairman and general manager of Guthrie's in the East, who had come to greet Sir John. Once the gangways were down, Mr. Taylor went to join Sir John in a quick shipboard breakfast, before bringing him ashore to drive to his house on the outskirts of the town. Significant of the widespread Guthrie interest in Malaya was the fact that the first thing Sir John saw on leaving the docks were the storage tanks of the Malayan Palm Oil Bulking Company. Mr. Taylor's house was to be Sir John's home during his stay at Singapore, and on this bright Sunday morning, Mrs. Taylor, his hostess, was waiting there to greet him. But soon now, the tour was to start in earnest. The following day, when Sir John paid his first visit to the office, the skies were grey and overcast, a pattern which many other days were to follow in the coming weeks. And from this office, with its view across Singapore River, Sir John conducted 3 days of discussions and conferences, which covered not only the trading side of the business — Guthrie's have 9 branch offices in the Federation and are the oldest established house in Malaya — but also the agency work, which exercises control over 160,000 acres of agricultural land. It was with special reference to this agency work that Sir John finalized arrangements for his tour of the estates. First of the estates was to be Ula Remis in Johor State, 43 miles by road from Singapore. This 16,000 acres of oil-bearing palms is owned by Oil Palms of Malaya, a company incorporated in 1930. The estate gives employment to some 2,000 workers, many of whom are engaged in harvesting the crop, for on an estate of this size, there is always fruit which is ripe and ready for cutting. Seeing the fruit in this form, it seems a far cry from the cooking fats and tablets of soap which find their way into homes all over the world. Early on the morning of Thursday, January the 9th, Sir John's escort convoy was assembling at the 43rd. For Mr. Ferguson, the acting manager, there was the added responsibility of security arrangements, for Johor State has the worst bandit record in the whole of the Federation. Sir John arrived soon after 10 o'clock, to be greeted by Mr. Ferguson and by Mr. Jenkins, representative of the agents. From this moment, and for the remainder of Sir John's stay, the security police were alert and ready. First point of call on the program was the hay clearing, which fringes the main road. Part of it, this newly planted stretch, was taken over by the company as recently as 1954. But with so much to see in 2 short days, there was time for little more than a brief look, and soon the party was returning to the cars to make the journey into the estate. On the north side of the hay clearing, a few miles in from the main road, the chairman stopped to look out across the latest extension of the land which bears his name, 2,000 acres which were cleared and planted in 1948 and 49. But on an estate of this size, there are many problems apart from the purely agricultural ones. A great deal of the routine work is concerned with the welfare of the people who work on the estate. Their homes, their health, and in some cases their children's education have to be provided for. The children's clinic here was set up to provide a service which is quite new in Malayan family life. This chap is almost a founder member. And so, for 2 days, the tour continued through fields of palms which, to the untrained eye, all look much alike, but in fact are not. Researchers and field workers are constantly experimenting to produce a palm which bears fruit with a high extraction ratio and yet is easy to cut. Research which is in part designed to eliminate this dangerous form of ladder palm harvesting. Apart from the obvious hazards of working at such a height, the falling fruit bunches, weighing up to 60 pounds, constitute a real danger to workers. Sir John stopped to examine the results of some of this research work. At Uluremis, it was always a happy occasion, but never far away, the reminder that Malaya is not a completely happy country. And it wasn't all car travel. Many places could only be reached on foot across rough ground. It was an exhaustive tour, and even the moments of relaxation at the manager's bungalow were restricted by meetings and conferences to discuss estate matters as varied as the upkeep of roads and the maintenance of railways and rolling stock. The roads are surfaced with laterite dredged out on the estate, and with 120 miles of them to be kept in good repair, it's a major job. The railways, too, need much attention. For if this 110 miles of track were not kept in order, the flow of fruit from field to factory would slow down, and its output, 10,000 tons of palm oil a year, would be reduced. The chairman took a very personal interest in the railway. Soon now it was time to leave. 2 days of crowded activity which ended where they began, at the 43rd milepost. Sir John returned to Singapore, but only to snatch a night's rest. The following day, Saturday, he left by air for Kuala Lumpur, accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Taylor. Part of the 250 miles flight was to be across some of the land belonging to the 30 companies of the Guthrie Group. On this day, though, the warm green softness of the true Malaya was obscured by haze. And there below, Kuala Lumpur, a rush of buildings, trees and roads, and then the runway. Waiting at the airport was Mr. Charles Thornton, Guthrie director and manager of the Kuala Lumpur office. The choice of Kuala Lumpur as a centre for estate organisation was an obvious one. With its strange hodgepodge of Western and Eastern architecture, it is the official federal capital of Malaya and has become the unofficial business capital. The Guthrie office is in the main street, Mountbatten Road, and for 3 days Sir John worked here on matters concerning the running of the estate. The first journey out from Kuala Lumpur was on Thursday, January the 19th, when he visited the Latex installation at Port Swettenham, Malaya's main west coast port after Penang. This installation, a cooperative one, exports on average anything up to 6 million gallons of liquid latex in any 1 year, the produce of 34 estates belonging to the 16 member companies of the cooperative. Sir John spent part of the morning here with Mr. van Kooperen, the assistant manager, and the estate's agents. Then he travelled to Heron, one of the estates belonging to Lingi plantations, on which there is an experimental coffee venture of 360 acres. The following day, Sir John visited the Jinjang tin dredge just outside Kuala Lumpur. This dredge has been in operation at Jinjang since June 1954, and Sir John, with Mr. Lawler, the manager, saw some of the concession, which is being worked at the rate of 2 acres a month. In the course of the next 12 years, the time it will take to clear the area of tin, a main road and railway will be shifted to make way for the teeth of the dredge's bucket. Since the country was first opened up by European merchants, tin has been one of its greatest natural assets. But Renong, the company which owns this dredge, was the first to dredge inland. The wisdom of this venture is proved by the fact that the screaming, clanking tin dredge, wallowing in its great artificial pond, is now a common part of the Malayan scene, and has made the country's tin export the largest in the world. This 2,000 horsepower dredge drives its armored buckets 100 feet into the earth to bring up the tin-bearing clay. After washing and treating, the silt is discharged behind. Day and night, the operation goes on and will go on until all the tin has been won. After this visit, Sir John returned to Kuala Lumpur for the weekend, and then on Sunday evening travelled by road to Tanah Merah, the largest estate controlled by United Sewer Beton. USB has some 36,000 planted acres in the peninsula, the biggest rubber area in Malaya to be controlled by a company whose ordinary shares are publicly held. Tanah Merah estate forms 12,000 of these acres and has recently celebrated the production of 1 million pounds of rubber from its factory in a month. The rubber here is produced in 3 grades: ribbed smoke sheet, brown crepe, and white sole crepe. Sir John started his tour on Monday morning at the factory, and with Mr. Crabb, the manager, examined some of this output. The continuation of record production in the future is assured by a progressive program of replanting. 3.5% of the planted acreage is the average figure each year for the Guthrie Group. Yet when dealing with nature, plans must be flexible enough to take into account happenings like this. Many acres of mature rubber laid waste by a freak storm in August 1955. Some of these acres were much as the storm left them when Sir John arrived. But other areas, like this 45-acre stretch of 1947 replant, have already been cleared and replanted. 5 or 6 years from now, the latex will be flowing again. By way of relief from estate matters, the Asian staff on Tanah Merah entertained Sir John at their temple to hear speeches of welcome and to drink orange squash. Part of the ceremony was the presentation of the traditional garland. "Come again" was its message. Sir John replied by thanking the workers for their loyalty. Shortly after this, that same evening, he was on his way again, this time to Port Dickson, where he was to stay for the next 4 days. Each morning, an estate manager would come to the villa to take him to his estate. On the first day, Tuesday, January the 24th, it was Mr. Ross of Sengkang, another USB estate, who came for Sir John. On the estate, the routine of tapping had been going on since sunrise. Every other day, a thin sliver of bark is removed to allow the latex to flow. The quantity of latex from each tree depends largely on the skill of the tapper. When Sir John arrived on the estate, he and Mr. Ross were able to examine some of the output of the morning's tapping. Here, too, there was a lighter side, only this time it was the estate children who were to welcome the chairman. For several days beforehand, they had rehearsed their drills and dances so that all might go well on the great day. Even the weather, it seemed, was on their side, more than could be said for most of the tour. The following day, on Suar Betong Estate, was typical of many. Grey, overcast skies and fitful squalls of fine, drenching rain. The new manager's bungalow, built to make maximum use of sunlight and air, was given no chance to display its designer's intentions on this dark day. Parts of the estate, too, looked and felt more like Britain than Malaya. Particularly the areas of old rubber, now uneconomic, which were being cleared of trees and ploughed ready for replanting. Felling trees requires a lot of concentration, but it's easy when you know how. The ploughing operation is to clear the ground of old roots which have become infected and would, if left, destroy the young trees. There are on this estate some 6,500 planted acres. Sir John and Mr. Bain, the manager, climbed to one of the highest points to look out across the rubber. Below them, but obscured from their view, the estate workers were carrying out their normal tasks. One task, calling for a great deal of skill and experience, is budding. The selected buds of a high-yielding tree are cut and trimmed and grafted onto a young seedling. The graft is protected from weather and pests by a leaf held firmly in position. Some weeks later, when the graft is taken, the seedling stem can be cut back, leaving the young shoot to go on to maturity. Covers are allowed to grow between the young plants to shade the soil and prevent erosion. but from time to time, these have to be cut back. Latex collection is another daily task. The tappers take the latex to collection stations on the estate, where it is weighed and bulked ready either for manufacture into RSS at the estate's own factory, or for dispatch by tanker to the latex factory at Siliao in Negri Sembilan. Sir John visited the latex factory on Thursday, January the 26th, and was shown around by the manager, Mr. Thompson. The factory produces about 3 million pounds of high-grade latex in a month. The liquid latex, both from here and from the even more recently opened factory at Tibong in Malacca, is bulked and dispatched by rail to Port Swettenham. On Saturday, the final day of the estate's tour, Sir John visited Labu, one of the estates of Labu Cheviot Rubber Limited. And although the rain kept most people indoors, it could not wash out the enthusiasm of the local scouts and cubs who had arranged a special jamboree for Sir John's benefit. These youngsters, gathered from many miles around, are the children of estate workers, and their scouting equipment is provided by the estate. Some of them may well be the estate managers of tomorrow, and Guthrie's, by running an enlightened scheme for the training of young Asians in the rubber industry, are ensuring that they will know their jobs. While some of them were too young to know just what was going on, their welcome showed that they knew it was a big day. And so the week ended, a week of miles traveled and impressions gathered, in which days of rain outnumbered those of sun. A week filled with good omens for the present and a vision of the future. A vision exemplified by these young trees, which by the same foresight that made Guthrie's pioneers of replanting will ensure that the group will be able to meet the challenge to come. And for Sir John, it was nearly the close of his Malayan journey. A few more days in Kuala Lumpur, and then back to Singapore for the day of departure. At 5 o'clock on February the 4th, the Chusan, recently returned from Hong Kong, lay against a somber sky, ready for departure. A few goodbye words from Mr. Taylor, and Sir John stepped off Malayan soil. As the ship made final preparations for putting to sea, there was time for a farewell wave, a farewell smile. And soon Sir John was on his way to England, home, and who could tell, maybe even sunshine.